Hello everyone, this is Putnam County historian Larry Tippin. We've been doing a series on the tiny towns and villages of Putnam County, and today I'd like to talk about Oakalla and Fern, sometimes known as Fern Station. If I get ahead of you and you'd like to pause, you can click your pause button on your browser or drag the circle and go back for a previous slide if I've gone ahead of you. This is an 1864 map of Putnam County survey, courtesy, of the Library of Congress. You see Greencastle, and then Greencastle Junction, which we also know as Limedale, and then in Madison Township, where Big Walnut and Little Walnut Creek converge. We're going to talk about this area. In 1864, there's nothing here. There's a few schools in the area. You see 3 of them. And then notice that there's no road that goes from this road that's going north of Big Walnut, south across Big Walnut in 1864, and there's no cemetery marked. In 1879, we do see a road going across and hitting what's now we call the Big 4 railroad track at Oakalla Station Post Office. And then west of that, you see Fern Station, the Eppenhauser and Johnson, a number of quarries here along the railroad, tours, and then you see the schools that we mentioned. This is a current overview map of Putnam County. I believe I got this from the county's county surveyors, county assessor's website. You can see the old rail bed where the old railroad was. And this is the current railroad north of that. You see this open area, several fields here and so forth. This is where the old railroad was. And then in the area, there's a cemetery, which is a substantial cemetery, about 50 burials. The first one being, I believe, about 1828. It's called the Oakalla Cemetery. But it's not marked on either of the maps of the 1864 to 1879. So a GPS location, put a pin where it is. It's on private property, so you have to get permission if you want to see it. Oakalla was noted for its fine limestone deposits, one of the early places settled in the county, where Isaac Wolverton, Arthur McGoy, and Peter Stone, and Matthew Cole took out land patents 1821, 1822, near where Oakalla was. Then William Torr came about 1823, and the Torrs became one of the most prominent families of that area of Oakalla. In 1870, see an article from the Greencastle Banner, courtesy of the Hoosier State Chronicles. If you'd like to go to the Hoosier Chronicles and search for these articles, you feel free to do so. But basically, they're talking about the new Terre Haute-Indianapolis Railroad, which is going to be in competition with the Vandalia, both running east and west between Indianapolis and Terre Haute, not far from each other. If you'd like to pause or read the whole article, feel free to do so. 1872, an article from the Daily Wabash Express of Terre Haute talking about Walter Eppenhausen, which is a major architect and builder of Terre Haute, but also proprietors of a stone quarry lime kilns at Oakalla in Putnam County. After the railroad came through, these lime deposits then could be quarried and put on the rail cars to be shipped to Indianapolis to Terre Haute. It's a very interesting article from 1928, the Daily Banner, about Madison Township ghost towns. They talk about Oakalla and also Fern Station. They talk about Charles Nicholas Eppenhausen, who we just referred to, had one of the early lime kilns of Oakalla area. Talking about the Big 4 Railroad, of course. Again, if you'd like to pause, you can pause anytime, or you can go to the Hoosier Chronicle and read the article. It's a very long article. Then about 1906, the Big Four Railroad was moved north, as we saw on that map just now. And then that was basically the end of the lime quarry business of Oakalla because they're too far from the railroad. And then this article talks about the abandoned road, basically going also through Fern and then Lena and Park County. And then they're talking about the old lime kilns and so forth and so on. That said, while Oakalla was spent on the railroad for its early life, the connection with the lime kilns again, and then large tonnage was cut and sent throughout Indiana, Illinois markets. It was used for quite a few businesses, buildings, and so forth throughout. I'm talking about the Big Four, which came through in 1870, as we noted earlier. And then some of the owners of the lime kilns, lime quarries. But we have Curtis and Hillis, brothers-in-laws, Torres, Silas Hayes, Greencastle, then became involved. And then Joseph Baker, John McFarlane, and then Bartley, the postmaster of Greencastle, all became involved in the lime business at Oakalla. And then not long after the railroad went through, then when Oakalla really started to thrive because of the lime business, it had a post office. And these were the postmasters. Again, you could pause if you'd like to read who they were. The post office was discontinued, mail sent to Fern, 1903. 1870 was an article saying Bayless Hanna, who's a candidate for Attorney General, is also an attorney for the Indianapolis and St. Louis Railroad, which became the Big Four. This article basically is saying maybe that perhaps too many people associated with this railroad are running for statewide political office. Is basically the point of this article. Bayless Hanna, a prominent attorney from Crawfordsville, Terre Haute, served as Indiana Attorney General from 1870 to 1872, the ambassador to Argentina from 1885 to 1889. He had been appointed ambassador to Persia in 1885, but Congress was in recess and he was never appointed. Again, he became the director of the Indianapolis Railroad, which became the Big Four. Later, he moved to Crawfordsville and started a newspaper. In 1858, he married Sarah Oakalla Reed of Terre Haute, daughter of a prominent doctor from Terre Haute. She went by Oakalla, but her name was Sarah Oakalla Reed. They had a daughter named Oakalla, which was the daughter's given name. It's very important, very significant, because this article in 1870 says the station in Oakalla on what became the Big Four Railroad was named after Sarah Oakalla Reed. So that's how we believe the Oakalla name came to be. We've researched this quite a bit. Steve Bonney, who's on the Putnam County Museum Board, and his frequent docent at the museum, did quite a bit of research on Oakalla also. And he wrote a nice article in the Putnam County Museum's newsletter we call The Arch about this area and the lime kilns and so forth. But we never could think anything else it contributed to the name of Oakalla other than Sarah Oakalla Reed, who married Bayless Hanna. You'd think that it would be maybe perhaps an Indian name or something, or Oak Alley. There's an Oak Alley, famous plantation near New Orleans, Louisiana, but we can't find any documentation of anything like that. So we think Oakalla was named after Sarah Oakalla Reed, who married Bayless Hanna. Article 1878 talks about the happenings of Oakalla in the previous week. You can see quite a few of the interesting things you'd like to stop and read. We'll pause and read some of these. You saw the Tor and the Sons putting up a blacksmith and Cooper shop, and so forth. A very sad article, 1895, with this Mr. Alexander Johnson, who resides in Oakalla, who's had a stroke. Boy, he's cutting a tree. His sons happened to come along about that time. He said, "Go ahead, boys, finish chopping the tree down," which they did. And then they carried him in to the doctors, but it was too late. Very sad story. 1878, James Torrance, son of Oakalla, have sent in a bid to furnish 15 carloads a day of crushed rock for the new State House to be constructed in Indianapolis. 1880, Tor Brothers of Oakalla Stone Quarries secured a contract to furnish about $25,000 worth of stone for a bridge over the Wabash at Hisdale, western Indiana. 1880, noting the trestle work on the Big Four Railroad between Oakalla and Lena has had some damage and so forth. Also in 1880, a very sad story. This is a very long article. I continue on the next slide also, where James Tor, who's returning committee from Greencastle, crossing the railroad tracks, is struck by a passenger train. It's very sad. Witnesses saw this and described the accident. You can pause to read it if you'd like. The sad part is he was going to Greencastle to get medicine for his wife, returning home at the time of the accident. They talk about Mr. Tor being a resident of Putnam County for about 40 years at that time. Very widely respected gentleman from the area. Very sad story. 1881, Ed Lynch of Greencastle, employed as a brakeman on the Big Four Railroad, severely crushed at Oakalla Wednesday, being caught between a freight car and a stone wall. And he did recover. I believe this is Joseph Tor, who's advertising that he's a livestock breeder and poultry, has eggs in stock for sale, 1895, in Oakalla area. And as we noted, 1906, the railroad, which by then went to be known as the Big Four, relocated its tracks about a half mile north. Part of the old railbed became county roads, and no longer having rail access, the limestone quarries became extinct. This is the Oakalla covered bridge, not at where Oakalla is now, but a little bit farther upstream of Big Walnut Creek. About the only thing now reminds us of the existence of Oakalla. Fern. Let's talk about Fern, also called Fern Station. West of Oakalla along the Snake Creek, which is a tributary of Big Walnut. Various histories indicate it's perhaps 200 million years old. The Shawnee grounds until 1830, because we know President Jackson had removed the Indians in the Indian Removal Act of 1830. So they had to leave. Most of them went to Oklahoma and Kansas. It was a popular hangout for the locals, DePaul students. And also it benefited when the Indianapolis Railroad came through in 1870. Very long article from Data Banner, 1928. A little bit hard to read. If you'd like to go to the Hoosier State Chronicles and read the article, you can. Talked a little bit about the history of Fern Station, they called it, along the Snake Creek. And they say the Pawnee Indians, although other references say Shawnee. I don't know if it's the same tribe with the different names. Then you talk about James Skelton, had a store and a grist mill and a shingle mill, also a postmaster. Fred Goddard also had the post office for a period of time. And the late Frampton Rockhill had an office at the station, part-time at Fern Cleft. Talk about the shingle mill of Skelton's, was a tobacco chopper style, which would cut, slice off basically the shingles piece at a time, so forth. And then they note that the railroad station was raised a little bit above the ground level and posts. The trains sometimes would stop, sometimes not. If they did not stop, they would just throw the post. The postmaster would hear the train go by, and it would hear the thump of the train from the train with the postage bag hitting the front porch of the station, and we go out and get the mail that way. And it goes on, talks a little bit about some of the other things and events. In 1884, DePaul noted the freshmen will picnic at Fern Station in a few days. It's a popular hangout for the locals and DePaul students. This is a very interesting article, 1894. If you want to pause, read the whole thing. Basically, the military department at DePaul has a camp at Ferncliff. And then some of the other boys, some of the other students at DePaul thought they would play a prank on these military students. And even though their plans were carefully guarded, it was leaked out. And by the time they'd arrived at Fern, about midnight or so, the military camp knew that they were coming and surprised them. And then they were suddenly surrounded by the camp soldiers. And then after a desperate chase, they captured 6 of these would-be marauders. And then the rest of the party straggled in back to Greencastle over the course of the following morning. Very interesting. I don't know what they thought they were going to do by surprising the military, the equivalent of what we maybe would consider ROTC. The Asbury Guards was a very popular and important military attachment of the Civil War, and then in later years. The postmasters at Fern, their post office didn't start till 1883, and then it was discontinued in 1904. About the time the post office instituted the Rural Free Delivery Service, they didn't really need the small post offices anymore. This is one that closed. Sad story in 1892. Where an aged man was killed on the tracks at Fern. It said that he was formerly attached to Company K, 11th Infantry, and absent from furlough at Surgeon's Home, Topeka, Kansas. What's really sad is some of the returning Civil War soldiers really had a hard time adjusting. It was very difficult for them, as you can only imagine. And some of them basically went delirious over time. Sometimes when they stepped in front of a train like this, it wasn't an accident. Very sad story. 1895, Lawrence Rockhill, who had an office in the station, said that he was injured by some lumber that was sticking out from the train, smacked him upside the head, caused damage to his eyesight and his hearing. 1880 is interesting history. If you want to read it, it's talking about the pay car of the railroad came through to the delight of everyone involved with that, and so forth, so on. Talk about James Skelton doing good business in the shingle trade and so forth. In 1880, they're talking about the temporary trestle west of Fern. We talked about earlier about where it had been damaged. Again, you could pause and read the whole thing if you'd like. 1910, a glass company buys Fern Cliff. Says the Root Glass Company of Terre Haute has purchased 123 acres to make up the Fern Cliff area. You can pause again if you'd like to read the whole thing. Continuing on. We see another article, September of 1910, where work has begun on the switch, which ended up being about 3,500 feet. Remember, the railroad didn't go through Fern anymore. It was north about a mile, so they had to run a 3,500-foot switch from the Big Four down to Ferncliff. And what they did was they mined the sand at Ferncliff and sent it to Terre Haute to make the glass for the Root Glass Company. And then in 1910, Ferncliffs are no more. Basically, they're moaning the fact that the Root Glass Company has set up a dam and rerouted Snake Creek. And then the cliffs, which is a popular hangout, is no longer. They've rerouted the creek, and then they've changed the cliff, and they're mining the sand where the cliff had been. In 1911, as James Goddard we read about earlier, has died. He's a popular citizen from the area. He had been in charge of what was known as Ferncliff for many years, popular hangout for DePaul students and citizens used it as picnic grounds. There's an excellent article in the Banner Graphic, November 18, 2015, talks about the 100th anniversary of the design of the 6.5-ounce Coca-Cola bottles. By 1915, the Coca-Cola Company has had some downturn in sales, wanted a new product, new packaging, or something. They had a contest, and designer Earl Dean of the Root Glass Company Terre Haute submitted the winning entry. As a reward, he was offered $500 or a job for life. He chose the job for life. This was the distinct style of those 6.5-ounce bottles, a little bit wider than the ones we know now. The green tint came from the vegetation in the sand at Ferncliff. As I said, they sent the sand to Terre Haute, where it was manufactured into glass, but because of the green tint, the vegetation sand had the green tint of the glass, which became very popular over time. And now, even though they don't use the sand at Ferncliff, the Coca-Cola Company has a slimmer design of the 6-ounce bottles, but they still artificially color it green. 1927, some of the neighbors of the Root Glass Company are suing them, saying that because the creek had been rerouted and dammed up, it's caused damage and flooding to the neighbors. So they're suing them. Let's talk about the Roots and the Root Glass Company. In 1932, William Root, who was the son of Chapman Root, who was the owner and founder of Root Glass Company, died in an airplane accident near Terre Haute. His father lost interest in Ferncliff and the glass company. He was very, very upset at his son's death and sold it to the Owens, Illinois Glass Company. This photo of Chapman Root died lived from 1864 to 1945. 1942, the Owens, Illinois Glass Company, which now at that time owns Ferncliff, is one of the 9 glass companies who are being sued in federal court, violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, meaning they have a monopoly. 1944, the Girl Scouts get the Fern Sand Pit, that's what they call it, from the Owens, Illinois Glass Company, who had by then has abandoned their operations at Ferncliff. Talking a little bit about the Girl Scouts and then the Ferncliff, so forth. 1957, a committee was developed to try to develop Ferncliffs and then try to get a permanent home or permanent structures, I should say, for the Girl Scouts. If you go to that area now, you can see some building or some remnants of what had been buildings, concrete foundations and so forth, but they never really got a permanent building that they wanted. See, in 1973, there was an interesting summary, the Banner Graphic. It was in so many pieces, I had to chop it up here to get it fit. If you'd like to read that, it's kind of interesting, or pause, read the whole thing. Many of the things that we've talked about the Shawnees and the Root Glass Company, But also they interviewed Abe Sears, who would work for the glass company at the sand quarrying operation for the glass company. Said he worked for $1.50 a day for 10-hour days. And during the peak time at Fern Cliffs, the quarry operated night and day, winter and summer. Said before the sand was loaded into cars, it had to be washed, and sufficient water for this process was obtained from Snake Creek. At that time, Abe Sears, who was 77, said he had walked half a mile to work. He couldn't recall how many men worked there, but it was a large crew. Continuing with that article, goes on just to say what we've already talked about the Coca-Cola bottle invented in 1915 by Root Glass and so forth. And then 1944, the Root Glass Company transferred title from Ferncliff to Wilma Handy and others trustees, Greencastle Girl Scouts. This is a very nice photo, courtesy Putnam County Public Library. Go to the library, thank Tony Barker, the archivist, for getting this photo for us. His operations at Sand Cliff, very neat. I see about 15 men here and a few younger people. I don't know if that's the entire operation then at that time. It's not dated, so we don't know when it was in operation. It was a very nice photo. But then 1973, the Girl Scouts then have canceled the camp at Ferncliff. Pause to read the article if you like. And then it became a nature conservancy with the state. This is their website. If you'd like to go to the Nature Conservancy website, talks about Ferncliff, which is designated as a national landmark in 1980, dedicated in parts as a state nature preserve in 1988, 1996. Talks about the ferns and so forth, so on. And then the work of the Nature Conservancy. You can go to Ferncliff. It's really hard to find. But if you want to go to it, it's open to the public. It's Nature Conservancy. You can walk the trails, very long trail, bring your hiking boots, and you can go and actually visit the remnants of Ferncliff. So I hope you've enjoyed our discussion today of Oakalla and Fern, and come back in future. We talk about more of the tiny towns and vantage villages of Putnam County.